The Winchester rifle cracked across the valley like thunder, and Larry Wilson dropped from his horse before the echo faded. Kelly Castillo worked the lever action with practiced ease, the brass cartridge spinning through morning air as she sighted the next target. Three more riders scattered behind the rocks, their confident advance suddenly transformed into desperate cover-seeking. She had warned them. 3 days ago, when they first rode onto her property demanding she sell, she had looked Jason Robinson straight in the eye and told him some things should not be taken. They laughed then, 5 men in dusty coats who thought a widow alone meant easy prey. Now Larry Wilson lay still in the dirt, and the others were learning what Kelly Castillo really was beneath the worn calico dress and silver-streaked hair. The morning sun caught the scope mounted on her rifle, the same scope she had used 15 years ago when they called her the Ghost of Guadalupe Ridge. Before she was Kelly Castillo, widow and horse trainer. Before she buried that life along with her husband Thomas and tried to find peace in this remote valley. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend after too long apart. Kevin Gutierrez raised his head above the boulder where he sheltered, trying to locate her position. She was already gone from the barn loft, moving through shadows with the fluid grace that had made her legendary. The bounty hunter who could track smoke across stone. The federal marshal who brought in the Dalton gang single-handed. The woman who disappeared after Guadalupe Ridge and was never seen again. Until now. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. This story is just getting started, and Kelly Castillo is about to remind these men why some legends should stay buried. But to understand how a quiet widow became the nightmare stalking Jason Robinson and his men through the rocks above Willow Creek, we need to go back 3 days. Back to when Kelly Castillo was still pretending to be nothing more than a woman trying to survive alone on a hardscrabble ranch in the Montana Territory. The morning had started like any other. Kelly rose before dawn, as was her habit, and walked the fence line checking for breaks or signs of predators. The horses nickered softly as she passed, recognizing her step even in the dim light. She had trained these animals herself, taking wild mustangs and gentling them with patience and skill. It was honest work, the kind that let her sleep without dreams of gunfire and blood. Her small cabin sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine-covered ridges, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through the rocks. Thomas had chosen this place carefully when they first came here 5 years ago. Defensible, he had said, though he claimed it was just for the good water and grass. Thomas had known what she was, what she had been, and he never asked her to be anything different. He simply loved her as she was and gave her a place to heal. She was checking the gate to the main pasture when she noticed the tracks. 5 horses, shod and well-fed, had approached her property sometime during the night. The riders had stopped at her fence line, studying her land before turning back toward town. Kelly knelt beside the clearest print, her fingers automatically reading the story written in the dirt. The led horse favored its left front slightly. One of the others had a loose shoe that left a distinctive mark. These were not casual travelers. Kelly straightened slowly, her hand unconsciously moving to her hip where she once carried a Colt 45. The holster was long gone, the gun locked away in a trunk beneath her bed along with everything else from her former life. She had not needed those tools for 5 years. She hoped she would not need them now. The riders came at midday when the sun was high and the shadows short. Kelly was working with a young stallion in the corral when she heard the hoofbeats approaching. She did not look up immediately, continuing to guide the horse through its paces while her ears tracked the sound. 5 horses, as she had expected, moving at an easy pace, confident and unhurried. They stopped at her gate without dismounting. Kelly finished her work with the stallion and walked slowly toward them, wiping her hands on a cloth. She took her time, studying each man as she approached. The leader was a big man with carefully groomed whiskers and expensive boots. Jason Robinson, she guessed, though she had never seen him before. His reputation had reached even this remote valley. He owned mines and timber claims throughout the territory, and he was not known for accepting refusal gracefully. The men flanked him were a mixed group. Larry Wilson she recognized as a gun for hire who had worked for various cattle barons. Kevin Gutierrez had the look of an ex-soldier, his posture military straight despite his casual clothes. Ryan Jones and Stephen Parker completed the group, both young and eager with the kind of swagger that came from riding with a powerful man. Jason Robinson touched his hat brim politely as Kelly approached. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an educated man, "I am Jason Robinson. I believe you know why I am here." Kelly stopped at her gate, her hands resting lightly on the top rail. She studied his face for a long moment before responding. "I am afraid I do not, Mr. Robinson. Perhaps you could enlighten me." His smile was practiced, the expression of a man accustomed to getting his way through charm before resorting to other methods. "Your land, ma'am. This entire valley sits directly in the path of my new railroad spur. I am prepared to offer you a fair price for your property." Kelly glanced past him at the four men who sat their horses in silence. Their eyes moved constantly, scanning her cabin, the barn, the surrounding ridges, professional men evaluating threats and escape routes. She looked back at Robinson. "I am not interested in selling, Mr. Robinson. This is my home." The charm faded slightly from Robinson's expression. "Ma'am, I think you misunderstand the situation. This railroad is going through whether you sell or not. The territorial governor has already signed the papers granting me eminent domain. I am offering to buy your land as a courtesy, but that courtesy has limits." Kelly felt something cold settle in her stomach, a familiar sensation she had not experienced in years. The feeling of standing at the edge of violence, of choices that could not be undone. She kept her voice level. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Robinson. You want my land, and you believe you can take it. But I am not leaving." Robinson's smile disappeared entirely. Larry Wilson shifted in his saddle, his coat falling open to reveal the butt of a revolver. Kevin Gutierrez's hand rested casually on his thigh, inches from his own weapon. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Ma'am," Robinson said, his voice harder now, "you are a woman alone in a very isolated place. Accidents happen out here. Fires, wild animals, men with bad intentions. It would be a shame if something unfortunate occurred because you were too stubborn to accept a generous offer." Kelly met his gaze steadily. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had built together in this valley, of the promise she had made to him as he lay dying, that she would find peace and leave the violence behind. But she also remembered the lessons learned in Blood and Gunpowder, the hard truths about men like Jason Robinson. "Mr. Robinson," she said quietly, "I suggest you leave before this gets complicated." The five men exchanged glances, and Larry Wilson actually laughed. "Lady," he said, "what exactly do you think you are going to do about it? You are one woman against five men. Be smart and take the money." Kelly studied each face in turn, memorizing details with the automatic precision of old training. Wilson's laugh was too loud, covering nervousness. Gutierrez watched her with the careful attention of a professional, but his eyes held the same dismissive assumption as the others. Robinson's confidence was absolute, built on years of getting his way through intimidation and force. They saw a woman in her 40s, weathered by frontier life, alone and invulnerable. They saw what she had worked 5 years to become. They did not see what she had been before Thomas found her and loved her back to something resembling human. "Some things should not be taken," she said finally. "You just took one of them." Robinson's expression hardened. "You have until tomorrow night to reconsider, ma'am. After that, I cannot guarantee your safety. This territory is full of dangerous men, and a woman alone attracts the wrong kind of attention." The threat was no longer subtle. Kelly nodded slowly, her mind already working through possibilities, calculating angles and distances and sight lines. "Tomorrow night," she repeated. "I understand." The five men turned their horses and rode away, kicking up dust as they headed back toward town. Kelly watched until they disappeared around the bend, then walked slowly back to her cabin. She stood on the porch for a long moment, looking out over the valley that had been her sanctuary, the place where she had finally learned to sleep without nightmares, where the ghosts of Guadalupe Ridge could not find her. But ghosts, she knew, had a way of returning when you least expected them. Inside the cabin, Kelly moved to the bedroom and knelt beside the bed. She pulled out a wooden trunk that had not been opened in 5 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid, revealing the carefully wrapped contents within. The Colt 45 lay in its holster, the leather still supple despite the years. Beneath it was a Winchester rifle with a telescopic sight, the barrel gleaming with oil she had applied before putting it away. A badge wrapped in black cloth, Wanted posters bearing her name, though they called her other things. The ghost, the hunter, the woman who could track a whisper across stone and put a bullet through a silver dollar at 300 yards. Kelly lifted the badge first, unwrapping it slowly. Deputy United States Marshal, it read, the medal still bright despite the years. She had earned this badge tracking killers and thieves across the worst country in the territory. She had worn it with pride until Guadalupe Ridge, until the thing that happened there made her question everything she believed about justice and law. The rifle came next, familiar weight settling into her hands like a missing piece of herself. She had carried this weapon for 7 years, through desert and mountain, in pursuit of men who thought they could escape justice by running far enough or fast enough. She had never missed when it mattered. The scope was German-made, precision ground, and mounted with care. Thomas had helped her sight it in when they first came to the valley, understanding without being told that she might need it again someday. Kelly assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. She checked the action, tested the trigger pull, peered through the scope at the distant ridgeline. Everything was as she had left it, maintained and ready despite the years of disuse. As the sun set behind the western peaks, Kelly Castillo began to remember who she had been before she became a widow trying to find peace. She remembered the lessons learned in blood, the skills that had kept her alive when lesser hunters died in the wilderness. She remembered why they had called her the ghost of Guadalupe Ridge, and why some men still woke screaming from dreams of her pursuit. Robinson and his men had made a fundamental error in judgment. They saw a woman alone and assumed a weakness. They did not understand that some people choose solitude not from inability to fight, but from knowledge of what they become when the fighting starts. Kelly spent the evening preparing. She cleaned and loaded the rifle, checked her ammunition supply, and planned her approach. Robinson would expect her to run or hide, to behave like the victim he believed her to be. Instead, she would do what she had always done best. She would hunt. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Betty Cook rode up from town just after dawn, her horse lathered and her face pale with urgency. Kelly met her at the gate, already dressed and ready for whatever Robinson might bring. "Kelly," Betty gasped, catching her breath. "I had to warn you. Robinson's men were in the saloon last night, drinking and talking loud. They are not planning to wait until tonight. They are coming this morning, and they are not coming to talk." Kelly helped the older woman down from her horse, noting the tremor in Betty's hands. "What did you hear?" Betty looked around nervously, as if expecting Robinson's men to emerge from the trees. "Larry Wilson was bragging about how they would handle you, said a woman alone needed to learn her place, and they were going to teach you. Kelly, they mean to hurt you bad before they burn you out." Kelly felt the familiar cold settle deeper in her chest. She had hoped Robinson would maintain the pretense of civilization, would at least attempt to force her out through legal means before resorting to direct violence. But men like Robinson rarely bothered with subtlety when they thought no one was watching. "Thank you for the warning, Betty. You should go now, before they arrive." Betty grabbed Kelly's arm. "Come with me. You cannot face 5 armed men alone. Come to town. Stay with me until this blows over." Kelly gently removed Betty's hand from her arm. "This will not blow over, Betty. Men like Robinson do not stop until someone stops them. And this is my land, my home. I will not run." Betty stared at her for a long moment, seeing something in Kelly's face that made her step back. There was a stillness about Kelly now, a quality of controlled readiness that had not been there the day before. "You are not planning to hide, are you?" Kelly smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Betty, I am not planning to hide." After Betty left, Kelly made her final preparations. She moved through her cabin systematically, gathering supplies and equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had done this many times before. Extra ammunition went into her coat pockets. A knife slipped into her boot. Field glasses found their place in a leather pouch at her belt. She paused at the mantelpiece where a daguerreotype of Thomas sat beside a dried wildflower bouquet. He had been a good man, patient and kind, who had seen past the violence in her history to the woman underneath. He had given her 5 years of peace, 5 years of believing she could leave the past behind and build something different. "I am sorry, Thomas," she whispered to the photograph, "but they left me no choice." Kelly picked up the Winchester and walked outside. The morning was clear and cold, with a sharp wind coming down from the peaks. Perfect weather for long-range shooting. She studied the approaches to her property, noting the natural choke points and lines of sight. Robinson's men would come from the main trail, confident in their numbers and expecting easy prey. They would not expect to be met by someone who had spent years learning how to kill from a distance. She climbed to the barn loft and settled into position behind the hay bales. From here, she could see the entire approach, with clear shots out to 400 yards. The Winchester's scope brought distant objects into sharp focus, and she methodically ranged key landmarks, calculating distances and wind drift. Kelly had been in position for less than an hour when she heard the hoofbeats. 5 horses moving at a steady pace, making no attempt at stealth. She peered through the scope and saw them clearly now. Robinson rode in the center, flanked by his 4 hired guns. They were armed with rifles and revolvers, dressed for work rather than intimidation. Larry Wilson carried a coiled rope, and Kevin Gutierrez had a can of coal oil tied to his saddle. Their intentions were unmistakable. They stopped at her gate, and Robinson called out in a voice that carried clearly across the distance. "Kelly Castillo, come out and we will make this quick. Stay hidden and we will take our time." Kelly settled the rifle's stock against her shoulder and found Wilson in the scope. He was the most dangerous of the group, a man who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. Professional courtesy demanded she take him first. Her finger found the trigger as Wilson dismounted and began walking toward the cabin. The range was 230 yards, with a slight crosswind from the left. She adjusted her aim accordingly and took a breath, letting it out slowly as she had been taught so many years ago. The rifle spoke with authority, and Larry Wilson dropped like a stone. The others scattered immediately, seeking cover behind rocks and trees as Kelly worked the lever action and searched for her next target. Their casual confidence had evaporated in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by the desperate urgency of men who suddenly realized they were not the hunters in this scenario. Kelly smiled grimly as she shifted position, moving through the barn with the fluid grace of someone who had done this dance many times before. Robinson and his remaining men had wanted to teach a lesson about the price of resistance. Now class was in session, and Kelly Castillo was the teacher. Kevin Gutierrez pressed himself against the boulder, his heart hammering as he tried to process what had just happened. Larry Wilson lay motionless 30 yards away, taken down by a single shot from an impossible distance. This was not supposed to happen. They had come to intimidate a frightened widow, not to face a professional marksman. "Where is she?" Ryan Jones called from behind a fallen log, his voice cracked with fear, the swagger of yesterday replaced by naked terror. "Shut up," Gutierrez hissed. "Sound carries. She is listening for us." Jason Robinson crouched behind his horse, using the animal as cover while he tried to understand how his simple intimidation had turned into a nightmare. The shot had been perfect, professional, the work of someone with extensive training and experience. This was not a lucky accident by a desperate woman. This was precision killing by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Kevin," Robinson called softly, "can you see the barn?" Gutierrez raised his head carefully, scanning the structure where the shot had originated. The hayloft was dark, offering no clear view of what might be hidden within. She could be anywhere in there, or she could have already moved to a different position. A professional would not stay in one place after revealing their location. "Nothing," he reported. "But she is not there anymore. Someone that good does not sit still after taking a shot." Stephen Parker was the youngest of the group, barely 20, and hired more for his willingness to follow orders than for any particular skill. He huddled behind a scrub oak, his rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Maybe we should go back to town," he whispered. "Get the sheriff. Come back with more men." Robinson's face flushed with anger. "We are not running from one woman. Kevin, work around to the left. Ryan, go right. We will flank her position and finish this." Gutierrez shook his head. "Mr. Robinson, with respect, that woman just put a bullet through Larry Wilson's heart at over 200 yards. That is not the work of an amateur. We need to think about what we are dealing with here." Robinson drew his revolver, the nickel plating gleaming in the morning sun. "I am dealing with a woman who thinks she can defy me. Nothing more. Now move." Gutierrez reluctantly began working his way to the left, using the scattered boulders for cover. He had served in the Army for 8 years, fighting Apaches and outlaws across the Southwest. He knew the difference between lucky shooting and professional marksmanship. The woman in that barn was no ordinary settler defending her home. She was something else entirely. Kelly watched the men's movements from her new position in the rocks above the barn. After taking the shot, she had immediately relocated, moving through a network of deer trails she had learned over 5 years of living in this valley. Now she lay concealed among the granite outcroppings, with clear sight lines to the entire area below. She tracked Gutierrez through the scope as he advanced carefully from boulder to boulder. He moved well, using proper cover and maintaining good spacing from his companions. Military training, she noted. He would be more dangerous than the others, harder to surprise or outmaneuver. But he was also predictable, following standard infantry tactics that Kelly had learned to counter long ago. Ryan Jones was moving to the right, but his inexperience showed in every step. He bunched up behind cover, exposed his position with unnecessary movement, and kept looking back toward Robinson for guidance. A target of opportunity, but not the immediate threat. Robinson himself remained behind his horse, clearly expecting his men to do the dangerous work while he stayed safe. Stephen Parker had not moved at all, paralyzed by fear and the sudden realization that he was in over his head. Kelly shifted the rifle's aim to Gutierrez. He was the professional, the one most likely to figure out her position and coordinate an effective response. Take him out, and the others would lose what little organization they had left. She found him in the scope just as he paused behind a large boulder, studying the terrain ahead. The range was 150 yards, an easy shot in these conditions. Kelly centered the crosshairs on his chest and began to squeeze the trigger. At the last moment, Gutierrez seemed to sense the danger. He threw himself sideways just as the rifle fired, the bullet chipping stone from the boulder where he had been standing. Kelly cursed silently and worked the lever action, but Gutierrez was already rolling behind better cover, shouting warnings to his companions. There, in the rocks above the barn, she has us ranged from up there. Robinson's voice carried clearly across the distance. Then get up there and kill her. Kelly smiled grimly. Robinson still did not understand what he was facing. He thought this was about superior numbers and firepower, about overwhelming a single defender through brute force. He had no idea that he had chosen to fight someone who had spent years learning how to turn those advantages against themselves. She began moving again, flowing through the rocks like smoke, always staying ahead of their advance. Let them come, let them spread out and lose sight of each other in the broken terrain. Kelly Castillo had been hunting dangerous men in country like this for longer than some of them had been alive, and she had never lost a hunt once it began. Olivia Hughes heard the gunfire from her cabin 2 miles down the valley and knew immediately what it meant. She had been expecting this day for 5 years. Ever since Kelly Castillo first arrived in the territory with haunted eyes and skills no ordinary woman should possess. Olivia had recognized the signs because she carried similar secrets herself. She moved quickly to her own hidden cache, retrieving a well-maintained Sharps rifle and a leather pouch filled with ammunition. The weapon was heavier than Kelly's Winchester, but capable of devastating accuracy at extreme range. Olivia had carried it during her years as a Pinkerton detective before the agency decided that women were unsuitable for fieldwork and forced her into retirement. The ride to Kelly's property took 20 minutes of hard travel through rough country. Olivia approached from the north, using a game trail that would bring her to the high ground overlooking the main valley. She could hear sporadic gunfire ahead, the sharp crack of rifles echoing off the canyon walls. As she crested the ridge, Olivia could see the tactical situation clearly. 3 men were advancing up the slope toward Kelly's position in the rocks, while Robinson remained behind cover near the barn. One body lay motionless in the open ground, testimony to Kelly's marksmanship. The attackers were trying to coordinate a flanking maneuver, but Kelly was staying ahead of them, using her superior knowledge of the terrain to maintain the advantage. Olivia dismounted and found a shooting position among the pines. From here, she had a clear view of Robinson's location, nearly 600 yards away. It was a challenging shot, but well within the Sharps rifle's capabilities. She settled into a comfortable prone position and began calculating wind drift and bullet drop. Meanwhile, Linda James was riding hard from the opposite direction. The sound of gunfire had reached her small ranch just as she was preparing to leave for town. Linda had served as a scout for the Army during the Apache Wars, one of the few women ever officially employed in that capacity. She knew the sound of a serious firefight when she heard it, and she knew Kelly would need help. Linda carried a Spencer repeating rifle, a weapon that had served her well during the war years. She approached from the south, planning to cut off any retreat route Robinson's men might attempt to use. As she rode, she thought about the quiet woman who had become her neighbor and friend. Kelly had never spoken of her past, but Linda had seen the way she moved, the way her eyes automatically cataloged threats and escape routes. Professional habits that never entirely disappeared. Back in the rocks, Kelly was beginning to feel the pressure of fighting multiple opponents simultaneously. Gutierrez had recovered from his near miss and was advancing more carefully now, using proper fire and movement tactics to close the distance. Ryan Jones was trying to flank her from the right, while Stephen Parker provided covering fire from below. They were learning to work together, coordinating their movements and keeping her pinned down. Kelly shifted position again, moving deeper into the granite maze. She knew these rocks intimately, every crack and crevice mapped during 5 years of solitary walks. But her ammunition was limited, and she could not keep falling back indefinitely. Soon she would have to make a stand and trust her skills against their numbers. She found a defensive position in a natural fortress of stone, with good cover and multiple escape routes. From here she could command the main approach while maintaining options for withdrawal if necessary. Kelly checked her remaining ammunition and settled into wait. Gutierrez appeared first, advancing cautiously from boulder to boulder. He was good, Kelly admitted, using proper cover and maintaining awareness of his flanks. But he was also predictable, following textbook tactics that Kelly had learned to counter during her years as a federal marshal. She let him get close, waiting until he committed to his next movement. When he broke cover to advance to a closer position, Kelly was ready. The Winchester spoke once, and Gutierrez spun around before dropping behind a fallen tree. Hit, but not down. Kelly worked the lever action and waited for him to show himself again. That was when Olivia Sharp's rifle spoke from the distant ridge. The heavy bullet took Jason Robinson in the chest, lifting him off his feet and sending him sprawling in the dirt beside his horse. The sound of the shot echoed across the valley like thunder, announcing to everyone present that the odds had suddenly changed. Ryan Jones panicked at the sight of his employer falling. He broke cover and ran for the horses, abandoning any pretense of tactical discipline. Linda James was waiting for him, her Spencer rifle trained on his position as he stumbled down the slope. She called out for him to surrender, but Jones was beyond rational thought. He raised his rifle toward her, and Linda put 2 quick shots into his center mass. Stephen Parker threw down his weapon and raised his hands, shouting his surrender to anyone who would listen. The fight was over as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the wounded Gutierrez and the terrified Parker alive from Robinson's original force. Kelly emerged from the rocks slowly, her rifle ready but no longer needed. She could see Olivia riding down from the northern ridge and Linda approaching from the south. 2 women she had known as neighbors and friends, now revealed as something more, something familiar. As the 3 women converged on the battlefield, Kelly felt a strange sense of completion. She had spent 5 years trying to bury her past, trying to become someone different. But perhaps the past was not meant to be buried. Perhaps it was meant to be integrated, accepted as part of who she was, rather than something to be ashamed of. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was back, and she was no longer alone. Michelle Jackson arrived as the sun reached its zenith, her medical bag in hand and her face grim with purpose. She had been the territory's only female doctor for 8 years, serving scattered communities across hundreds of miles of rough country. She had also served as a field surgeon during the war, patching up wounded soldiers under fire while shells exploded around her position. Michelle went to work immediately, checking the wounded and confirming the dead. Larry Wilson and Ryan Jones were beyond help, their wounds instantly fatal. Jason Robinson had died from the massive trauma of Olivia's long-range shot, the heavy Sharp's bullet having done devastating damage. Kevin Gutierrez was alive but seriously wounded, Kelly's bullet having shattered his shoulder and caused significant blood loss. Stephen Parker sat with his hands still raised, tears streaming down his face as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his shock. He was barely 20 years old, Michelle noted, probably hired more for his willingness to follow orders than for any particular skill or experience. Kelly watched Michelle work with professional efficiency, noting the doctor's calm competence under pressure. Another woman with hidden depths, another neighbor who was more than she appeared. Kelly was beginning to understand that her remote valley had attracted others like herself, women seeking refuge from violent pasts and dangerous skills. We need to talk, Olivia said quietly, approaching Kelly's position. All of us. There are things that need to be said. Kelly nodded, understanding the implication. The secret was out now, revealed by necessity and violence. There was no going back to the careful pretense of ordinary frontier life. Too much had been exposed, too many questions raised that would demand answers. Linda James finished securing the horse and weapons, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to cleaning up after violent encounters. She had found papers in Robinson's saddlebags, documents that revealed the scope of his plans for the valley. Railroad surveys, territorial maps, and correspondence with territorial officials. The attack on Kelly's property had been just the beginning of a much larger scheme. Michelle finished bandaging Gutierrez's wounds and stood up, wiping blood from her hands. He will live, but he needs proper medical attention. We should get him to town. Kelly looked down at the wounded man, seeing fear and confusion in his eyes. He had served his country honorably, she guessed, before falling in with men like Robinson. Now he was paying the price for choosing the wrong employer and underestimating the wrong woman. What do we tell the sheriff? Linda asked. Robinson was connected to powerful people in the territorial government. There will be questions, investigations. They will want to know how 4 women managed to defeat 5 armed men. Kelly considered the question carefully. The truth was too complicated, too dangerous for women who had worked hard to build new lives away from their violent pasts. But lies would be equally dangerous if they were discovered later. We tell them the truth, she said finally. Robinson came here to force me off my land. When I refused, he and his men attacked. We defended ourselves. Everything else is irrelevant. Olivia smiled grimly. Simple and clean, I like it. But what about afterward? Robinson's death will create a power vacuum. Other men will move to fill it, and some of them might be even worse. Kelly looked around the valley that had been her sanctuary for 5 years. The place where she had tried to find peace, to leave the violence behind and build something different. Now blood had been spilled on this ground, and the illusion of safety was forever shattered. But perhaps that was not entirely a bad thing. Perhaps hiding from what she was had been a mistake from the beginning. Perhaps integration was better than denial, acceptance better than shame. Then we will be ready for them, Kelly said, all of us, together. We know what we are now, what we are capable of. Let them come. Michelle looked up from packing her medical supplies. Are you talking about forming some kind of alliance? A mutual defense pact? Kelly nodded slowly. We are all here for the same reason. We all have skills that others would find threatening. We all chose isolation over integration because we thought it was safer. But maybe we were wrong. Maybe there is strength in standing together instead of hiding separately. Linda James checked her rifle and nodded approvingly. I like the sound of that. I am tired of pretending to be helpless when men like Robinson come around. Tired of acting weak when I know I am strong. Olivia Hughes looked out over the valley, seeing it with new eyes. A defensible position, she mused. Good sight lines, limited approaches, natural choke points. We could make this place into a fortress if we needed to. Kelly felt something she had not experienced in years. Not just the satisfaction of a successful hunt, but the deeper pleasure of finding her tribe. Women who understood what it meant to carry dangerous skills in a world that feared female competence. Women who had tried to hide what they were and discovered that hiding is its own form of prison. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was back, but she was no longer a ghost. She was flesh and blood and bones, surrounded by allies who shared her strengths and understood her struggles. Together they could build something new, something that honored both their violent pasts and their hopes for a peaceful future. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, the 4 women began planning their next moves. There would be questions to answer, authorities to satisfy, and threats to prepare for. But for the first time in years, Kelly Castillo felt truly alive. The hunt was over, but the real work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the gunfight, Sheriff William Hayes rode out to Kelly's property with a small posse and a head full of questions. He was a good man, honest and competent within the limits of his experience. But the official reports from the incident had left him deeply puzzled. 4 women had somehow defeated 5 armed men in open combat, including the notorious Larry Wilson and the ex-military Kevin Gutierrez. The story did not add up according to any logic Hayes understood. Kelly met him at her gate, dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair pinned back in a modest bun. She looked exactly like what she claimed to be, a frontier widow trying to make an honest living training horses. But Hayes had been a lawman for 15 years, and he had developed an instinct for when people were not telling him the complete truth. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim respectfully, "I hope you understand why I need to ask some more questions about what happened here. The territorial governor is taking a personal interest in this case." Kelly nodded calmly. "Of course, Sheriff. I understand this was an unusual situation. Please ask whatever you need to ask." Hayes dismounted and walked slowly around the area where the bodies had been found. He studied the sight lines, the distances, the positioning of cover. Everything he saw confirmed what the evidence had already told him. This had been precision shooting by someone with extensive training and experience. "Ma'am," he said finally, "Larry Wilson was hit at over 200 yards with a single shot through the heart. That is exceptional marksmanship by any standard. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Kelly met his gaze steadily. "My late husband Thomas was an excellent teacher. He believed a woman alone on the frontier should know how to protect herself." Hayes nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "And the other shots?" "Kevin Gutierrez was wounded from a different position entirely. The angles suggest the shooter moved several hundred yards between shots, all while under fire from multiple opponents. I know this country well, Sheriff. I have been walking these trails for 5 years. When men are shooting at you, you move to where they cannot shoot back." It was a reasonable answer, but Hayes could sense the layers of truth beneath it. This woman was hiding something, probably something significant, but she had been defending her own property against armed attackers, and the law was clearly on her side regardless of what secrets she might be keeping. "What about the other women?" "Olivia Hughes claims she was just passing by when she heard gunfire. Linda James says the same thing. Pretty convenient that two more expert markswomen happened to be in the area at exactly the right time." Kelly's expression did not change. "We help each other out here, Sheriff. When someone is in trouble, neighbors respond. That is how we survive in country like this." Hayes studied her face for a long moment, seeing intelligence and strength carefully hidden behind a mask of frontier simplicity. He had no doubt that Kelly Castillo was far more than she appeared to be. But he also had no evidence of any wrongdoing, and the territorial governor's interest in the case was making him nervous about pushing too hard. "Ma'am," he said finally, "I want you to know that Jason Robinson had powerful friends in the territorial government. His death is going to cause ripples, and some of those ripples might wash back over you and your neighbors. If I were you, I would be very careful about who I trusted and where I went alone." Kelly smiled, and for just a moment, Hayes caught a glimpse of something cold and predatory behind her eyes. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. I will keep it in mind." After Hayes and his posse left, Kelly walked up to the ridge where she had made her stand 2 weeks earlier. The bloodstains had been washed away by recent rains, but she could still see the scars where bullets had chipped the granite. Physical reminders of the day her old life and new life finally collided. She was not alone on the ridge. Olivia Hughes sat on a fallen log, cleaning her Sharps rifle with the methodical care of a professional. Linda James was scouting the northern approach, checking for signs of unwanted visitors. Michelle Jackson was at the cabin below, treating a horse with a minor injury, but also maintaining watch on the main trail. "We are going to have company soon," Olivia said without looking up from her rifle. "Robinson's death has created opportunities, and ambitious men are already moving to fill the vacuum. I have contacts in the territorial government who keep me informed." Kelly settled onto a boulder, her own Winchester across her knees. "What kind of company?" Olivia finished cleaning the rifle's action and began reassembling it. "The kind that makes Robinson look like a gentleman. There is a man named Marcus Thornton who has been waiting for an opportunity like this. He owns mines and lumber mills throughout the territory, and he has political connections that go all the way to Washington. More importantly, he employs the kind of men who do not make the mistakes Robinson's people made." Kelly felt the familiar cold settle in her chest. She had hoped the confrontation with Robinson would be the end of it. That word would spread and other predators would look for easier prey. But men like Robinson were rarely unique. For every one that fell, two more waited in the shadows. "How long do we have?" she asked. Olivia shouldered the rifle and stood up. "My sources say Thornton is already assembling a team, professional gunmen, ex-military, maybe even some federal marshals who have been bought and paid for. He will not make Robinson's mistake of underestimating his opposition. Kelly nodded, her mind already working through defensive preparations. The valley offered natural advantages, but it could also become a trap if they were not careful. They would need supplies, ammunition, and reliable intelligence about their enemies' movements. Then we had better get ready, she said. All of us, together. Linda James appeared at the edge of the clearing, moving with the silent grace of someone who had spent years tracking dangerous prey. She carried disturbing news. I found tracks on the northern trail, she reported. 3 riders, moving carefully and staying off the main paths. Professional scouts, checking our defenses and looking for weaknesses. Kelly stood up, the Winchester coming naturally to her hands. It was starting again, the deadly game of hunter and hunted that she had thought was behind her forever. But this time she would not be playing alone. This time she had allies who understood the rules and possessed the skills to enforce them. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was about to become a legend again. But now she was part of something larger, something that might prove even more dangerous than a single hunter in the wilderness. The women of Willow Creek Valley were preparing for war. Marcus Thornton arrived in the territorial capital 3 days later, his private railroad car gleaming with brass fittings and expensive wood paneling. He was a man who understood the value of appearances, of projecting power and wealth in every interaction. But beneath the civilized veneer lay something much more dangerous than Jason Robinson had ever been. Thornton had built his empire through a combination of political corruption, economic manipulation, and carefully applied violence. He owned judges and senators, controlled shipping routes and mining claims, and maintained a private army of enforcers who could make problems disappear without leaving inconvenient evidence. Robinson's death represented both an opportunity and a challenge that would require his full attention. The meeting took place in the governor's private office, away from curious eyes and listening ears. Present were Thornton, Governor William Morrison, and Federal Marshal David Crane, a man whose loyalty had been purchased years earlier through a combination of bribes and blackmail. Gentlemen, Thornton began, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an Eastern education. We have a situation that requires immediate resolution. Jason Robinson's death has created a power vacuum in the Montana Territory, and nature abhors a vacuum. Governor Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The official reports indicate Robinson was killed while attempting to illegally seize private property. Technically, the women who killed him were acting in self-defense. Thornton smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Governor, you and I both know that legality is a flexible concept when properly applied. Robinson was advancing my interests in that valley, and his death represents a significant setback to my plans. More importantly, it sends the wrong message to other potential obstacles. Marshal Crane leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. Mr. Thornton, I have been making discreet inquiries about these women. What I have learned is disturbing. They are not ordinary frontier settlers defending their homes. They are something else entirely. Thornton's eyes sharpened with interest. Explain. Crane consulted a leather portfolio filled with official documents and handwritten notes. Kelly Castillo, the primary target, has no verifiable history before her arrival in the territory 5 years ago. No family records, no previous addresses, no documentation of any kind. It is as if she simply materialized out of thin air. That is not unusual for frontier women, Morrison protested. Many people come west to escape their pasts. Crane shook his head. This is different. I have been a federal marshal for 20 years, and I know how to read the signs. Kelly Castillo moves like someone with extensive combat training. She maintains her weapons with professional precision. Most telling of all, she displays tactical awareness that suggests military or law enforcement background. Thornton leaned back in his chair, his mind processing the implications. Go on. The other women show similar patterns. Olivia Hughes claims to be a retired seamstress, but she owns a Sharps rifle worth more than most people make in a year. Linda James supposedly raises cattle, but she tracks like an Apache scout and shoots like a cavalry sniper. Michelle Jackson practices medicine with surgical skills that suggest battlefield experience. Thornton smiled again, this time with genuine pleasure. How fascinating. It appears Robinson stumbled into a nest of retired professionals. No wonder his crude intimidation tactics failed so spectacularly. Governor Morrison looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Thornton, if these women have military or law enforcement backgrounds, we cannot simply eliminate them. There could be federal investigations, congressional inquiries. The political ramifications could be enormous. Thornton waved away the governor's concerns. Gentlemen, you are thinking too small. These women represent an opportunity, not a problem. Professional killers who have chosen to hide in the wilderness rather than capitalize on their skills. They are running from something, which means they have vulnerabilities we can exploit. Marshal Crane nodded slowly. If we can discover what they are hiding, we can use it against them, force them to cooperate, or face exposure of their secrets. Thornton stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the territorial capital with the satisfaction of a man who owned everything he could see. Exactly. But first we need more intelligence. I want to know who these women really are, what they did before they came to Montana, and why they chose to disappear. Marshal Crane, you have access to federal records that could provide answers. Crane made notes in his portfolio. I will begin immediately, but Mr. Thornton, if these women are as dangerous as I suspect, we will need to approach them very carefully. Professional killers do not surrender easily, and they have already proven they can work together effectively. Thornton turned back to face the room, his expression cold and calculating. Then we will have to be more professional than they are. I want you to assemble a team of our best people, ex-military, former federal agents, men who understand the difference between intimidation and elimination. And Marshal Crane, I want you to personally oversee this operation. Your federal authority will provide legal cover for whatever becomes necessary. Governor Morrison stood up abruptly. Gentlemen, I cannot be party to this conversation. If you are planning to murder American citizens on territorial soil, I must distance myself from your activities. Thornton's smile turned predatory. Governor, you have been party to my activities for 8 years. Your signature is on dozens of documents that would be very difficult to explain to a federal grand jury. You will provide whatever support is required, or you will find yourself sharing a cell with the very criminals you helped create. Morrison's face went pale, but he nodded reluctantly. What do you need from me? Legal cover, Thornton replied. Warrants, territorial authority, official justification for whatever actions become necessary. These women may be professionals, but they are still fugitives from something. We will find out what, and we will use it to destroy them. As the meeting concluded and the participants dispersed to their respective tasks, none of them understood the true magnitude of their mistake. They saw 4 women hiding in the wilderness and assumed weakness, vulnerability, something that could be exploited through superior resources and political connections. They did not understand that some people choose isolation not from inability to fight, but from knowledge of what they become when the fighting starts. They did not realize that they were about to face the combined skills of women who had survived in the most dangerous professions imaginable, women who had chosen peace but never forgotten war. Marcus Thornton thought he was hunting frightened fugitives. Instead, he was about to discover what happened when predators chose to stop hiding and embrace their true nature. The women of Willow Creek Valley were no longer running from their pasts. They were preparing to weaponize them. The intelligence arrived through channels Kelly had not used in 5 years. A coded message delivered by a traveling merchant who seemed ordinary enough until he whispered a recognition phrase that sent her mind racing back to her days as a federal marshal. The network still existed, still functioned, still protected its own even after all these years. Kelly read the message by lamplight in her cabin, translating the cipher with skills she had hoped never to need again. The news was worse than she had feared. Marcus Thornton was not just another territorial robber baron. He was connected to a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, a network of corruption that had been growing for years while honest lawmen looked the other way. More importantly, Marshal David Crane was leading the investigation into their identities. Crane had access to federal records, military archives, and Pinkerton files. If anyone could uncover their true histories, it would be him. And once those histories were known, the women would lose the anonymity that had protected them for years. Kelly finished reading the message and burned it carefully, watching the paper turn to ash in her fireplace. Then she walked outside into the cold mountain air, looking up at stars that seemed distant and indifferent to human struggles. She had tried so hard to leave the violence behind, to become someone different. But violence, she was learning, had a way of finding you regardless of how far you ran. The next morning brought a war council in Olivia's cabin. The four women sat around a rough wooden table, their weapons within easy reach and their faces grim with purpose. Maps of the territory covered the table's surface, marked with defensive positions and escape routes that might become necessary in the days ahead. Michelle spoke first, her medical training making her naturally concerned with logistics and preparation. "We need to consider evacuation," she said. "If Thornton has federal authority behind him, we cannot fight the entire territorial government. Sometimes retreat is the only rational option." Linda shook her head firmly. "Run where? If Crane uncovers our identities, there will be wanted posters and federal marshals waiting in every town from here to California. We made our stand when we chose to fight Robinson. Now we finish it." Olivia studied the maps with the tactical eye of someone who had planned military operations. "We have advantages they cannot overcome," she said. "We know this country intimately. We have prepared defensive positions. Most importantly, we have skills they do not expect and cannot counter." Kelly listened to the discussion while her own mind worked through darker possibilities. She had spent 7 years as a federal marshal, tracking killers and thieves across the worst country in the territory. She knew how these hunts ended when the prey was cornered and desperate. Someone always died, usually everyone. "There is another option," she said quietly, and the other women turned to look at her. "We stop running. We stop hiding. We take the fight to them before they can bring it to us." Michelle looked shocked. "You are talking about assassination. Cold-blooded murder of territorial officials." Kelly met her gaze steadily. "I am talking about justice. Thornton and his people are criminals who have corrupted the legal system for their own benefit. They have murdered honest officials, stolen public resources, and terrorized innocent citizens. The law cannot touch them because they own the law." Olivia nodded slowly. "You are suggesting we become what we used to be, not settlers defending our homes, but hunters stalking dangerous prey." "Exactly," Kelly replied. "We have skills that took years to develop and cost blood to learn. We have been hiding those skills, pretending to be helpless when we know we are anything but. Maybe it is time to stop pretending." Linda checked her rifle and smiled grimly. "I like the sound of that. I am tired of being hunted. Time to remind these people why they should be afraid of us." Michelle remained reluctant. "If we start killing territorial officials, we become outlaws ourselves. There will be no going back to peaceful lives, no return to anonymity. We will be fugitives for the rest of our lives." Kelly stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the valley that had been her sanctuary for 5 years. "Perhaps that is what we were always meant to be," she said. "Perhaps trying to hide from what we are was the real mistake." She turned back to face the other women, and they saw something in her eyes that had not been there before. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was fully awake now, no longer constrained by widow's weeds and peaceful pretensions. She was a hunter again, and she had found prey worthy of her skills. "The question is not whether we can win," Kelly continued. "The question is whether we have the courage to become what we need to be, to stop apologizing for our strengths and start using them to protect what we value." Olivia Hughes stood up as well, her hand resting on her rifle. "I have been hiding for 8 years," she said, "pretending to be weak when I know I am strong, pretending to be helpless when I could kill a man at 600 yards. I am done pretending." Linda James nodded agreement. "They want to hunt us like animals. Let them learn what it means to be prey." Michelle Jackson remained seated for a long moment, her medical training warring with something deeper and more primitive. Finally, she sighed and stood up. "I became a doctor to save lives," she said, "but sometimes you have to cut out the infection to save the patient. If Thornton and his people represent an infection in the territorial government, then maybe it is time for surgery." Kelly felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched her allies commit themselves to the path ahead. They were no longer hiding from what they were, no longer ashamed of skills that had kept them alive in the most dangerous situations imaginable. They were professionals again, hunters and killers and protectors, united by purpose and strengthened by shared resolve. The women of Willow Creek Valley had tried to find peace through isolation and anonymity. Now they would find it through superior firepower and tactical precision. Marcus Thornton thought he was hunting frightened fugitives. He was about to discover his mistake. The end came swiftly, as such things often do when professionals stop holding back and embrace their true nature. Kelly Castillo and her allies spent 3 days planning their campaign, using skills honed in the most dangerous occupations imaginable to design a strategy that would eliminate their enemies while protecting their own interests. They struck first at Marshal David Crane, intercepting him on a remote trail while he traveled to investigate their backgrounds. Olivia Hughes took him cleanly at 400 yards, her Sharps rifle speaking with final authority across the mountain silence. Crane died never knowing what killed him, his federal badge and corrupt authority meaningless against precision marksmanship and righteous purpose. Marcus Thornton learned of Crane's death while meeting with his hired gunman in a supposedly secure location outside the territorial capital. Linda James had tracked them to their hideout using skills learned during the Apache Wars, moving through hostile country like a ghost made of shadow and silence. The Spencer rifle in her hand spoke 7 times in rapid succession, and 7 professional killers died before they could draw their weapons. Thornton himself tried to run, abandoning his plans and his empire in a desperate attempt to reach safety in the east. Kelly Castillo was waiting for him at the railroad station, standing calmly on the platform while his private car prepared to depart. She walked up to his window and looked him in the eye, letting him see exactly what he had awakened through his greed and arrogance. The Winchester rifle cracked once, and Marcus Thornton's reign of corruption ended with the same precision that had marked its beginning. Kelly walked away without looking back, leaving the territorial government to sort out the pieces of a conspiracy that had finally consumed itself. Governor Morrison resigned the next day, claiming health problems that prevented him from continuing in office. The federal investigators who arrived to examine the deaths found evidence of corruption so extensive that it took months to catalog. Thornton's empire collapsed as his political connections scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. The women of Willow Creek Valley returned to their homes, but they were no longer hiding from what they were. Kelly Castillo resumed training horses, but now she wore her rifle openly and met visitors' eyes with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear. Olivia Hughes continued her quiet life, but travelers began to speak of the woman who could put a bullet through a silver dollar at impossible distances. Linda James raised cattle and scouted for the Army when they needed someone who could track ghosts across stone. Michelle Jackson practiced medicine throughout the territory, carrying surgical skills and other talents that made her welcome in the most dangerous places. They had tried to find peace through hiding, through denying their true nature, and pretending to be helpless. Instead, they found it through integration, through accepting what they were and using their skills to protect what they valued. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was no longer a ghost, no longer a legend, whispered in fear. She was a woman who had learned to live with both her peaceful nature and her warrior skills, who could train horses in the morning and hunt killers in the afternoon without contradiction or shame. She had found her tribe, women who understood the weight of dangerous skills and the responsibility that came with them. Kelly stood on her porch as the sun set behind the western peaks, looking out over the valley that had become her true home. The place where she had learned that running from yourself was impossible, that integration was stronger than denial, that some legends were worth living up to rather than hiding from. The ghost of Guadalupe Ridge was at peace at last, not because she had abandoned her past, but because she had finally learned to embrace it. In the distance, smoke rose from Olivia's cabin, and Kelly could see Linda riding the ridgeline on her evening patrol. Michelle would be tending to a patient in town, carrying healing and protection in equal measure. 4 women who had tried to disappear had instead found each other, had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in hiding their skills, but in using them together. The territorial government learned to leave Willow Creek Valley alone, understanding that some places were defended by forces that transcended law and politics. Kelly Castillo smiled as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. She had spent 5 years trying to bury the ghost of Guadalupe Ridge, only to learn that some ghosts were meant to walk among the living. Some legends were meant to protect rather than terrify, to serve rather than dominate. The widow had become the warrior again, but this time she was not alone. This time she was home.